Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Francine Schertzer. Today we'll talk about the state budget, but first we're joined by Justin Schweitzer, Managing Editor of City and State PA. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Your latest article notes that the anticipated restart of 3 Mile Island is ahead of schedule. Could you remind our viewers, why is TMI Unit 1 being put back into commission?
Yeah, so when it comes down to it, 3 Mile Island Unit 1 is being relaunched as part of essentially a 20-year power purchase agreement with Microsoft and Constellation, the owner of the reactor. Microsoft is looking for carbon-free energy to power its data centers. And, data centers are really a big thing right now, especially as we talk about things like artificial intelligence and how that may transform different, sections of society and work and all these things. So Microsoft is looking for more power, and they see this reactor at 3 Mile Island as a way to get more carbon-free power on the grid, and ultimately power some of these centers.
Can you talk a little bit more about why there's an uptick in energy needs, particularly through these data centers?
Yeah, when it comes to AI and some of these technologies we're seeing today, they require a large bit of computing power. So when it comes to just, housing the infrastructure that, is needed to help power some of these products, they really do require a lot of electricity, a lot of energy, because of the, large quantities of computing power, needed to ultimately, allow these products to function.
How will the restart of 3 Mile Island impact central Pennsylvania economically?
Yeah, so that's the big selling point for proponents of this project, of this relaunch, is that it's going to, result in a significant number of jobs, potentially up to 3,400 indirect and direct jobs. And then when it comes to direct jobs, full-time jobs that would result from the relaunch of this plant, they're ballparking a number at about 600 full-time jobs. So it could result in hundreds of jobs for the region, as well as, a significant amount of cash flowing through the local economy, things like restaurant, things like hotels. That's for people, both who may work at this plant full time, but, they're going to be using lots of temporary workers for things like updates to the plant, and things of that nature. So, we'll see people flowing into the mid-state and the central PA region, as a result of this project.
TMI Unit 2 was closed in 1979 due to a partial meltdown. What is Constellation Energy doing to address any safety concerns?
So I believe they recently, submitted a safety plan with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and they're pretty adamant in looking at these reactors as two separate reactors, which they are. The other reactor has a different owner. Constellation does not own the reactor that will be relaunched. So they're really looking to push their record of safety with Reactor 1. We haven't seen any issues with Reactor 1 compared to Reactor 2. So, they're really looking to, sell community members on their narrative and their, safety record throughout the many decades that they have run this plant.
When is the 3 Mile Island facility expected to be operational again?
So Constellation is targeting a mid-2028 relaunch date. That obviously could change, dependent on certain, regulatory approvals. They still need, regulatory approval from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, as well as they need to have the plant, formally reconnected to the grid. And that's a process that goes through PJM, the regional grid operator. So those are two big points they're going to have to get to before the relaunch occurs, but they're targeting, the middle of 2028 right now.
Justin Schweitzer, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
More of the PCN Capitol Preview after the short break.
PCN brings you live coverage of the 2025 PIAA Swimming and Diving Championships. Watch Pennsylvania's top swimmers and divers compete live from Bucknell University March 12th through the 15th. Champions will be crowned, records may be broken. Watch it all on PCN or stream with PCN Select. Learn more at PCNTV.com. PCN is Pennsylvania Sports. The Pennsylvania Press Club gives key lawmakers and newsmakers a forum to discuss issues of the day with the club's members and guests. The featured speaker at the monthly luncheon answers questions that are collected from the audience and read aloud by the event's MC. The guests include governors past and present and other prominent figures from the world of politics and business. Democratic National Committee Vice Chair Representative Malcolm Kenyatta live today at 12:30 p.m. on PCN.
Welcome back. Our guests today are the chairs of the Senate Appropriations Committee, Senator Vincent Hughes and Senator Scott Martin. Senator Martin, we'll start with you. Governor Josh Shapiro presented his budget address in early February, and budget hearings are now underway. What stood out to you most, both from the governor's proposals and from the testimonies that you've heard during hearings this last week or so?
So thank you for having us on. For me personally, I thought I was expecting a different type of budget proposal at first. I think it's pretty common knowledge that the Commonwealth currently is spending about $3.2 billion more annually than what it's taking in as revenue. And so that's a structural deficit. I know that the general fund balance has gone down tremendously to about a little over $3 billion. And of course, we're getting very close to the point where we were close to tapping into the rainy day fund. So for the future years coming up here. So I really thought that would be a focus coming into this budget. The 7.5% increase in spending that he proposed really kind of took me back. Obviously, it took us to about $51.5 billion. But what really stood out to me was really a lot of the revenue projections that I saw. Traditionally, whether it's the appropriations committees, whether it's the independent fiscal office, or whether it's the governor's office, you traditionally see maybe there could be some couple $100 million off in some of the projections over the planning years that we're looking at. And what we saw with our baseline revenues was really a significant difference of about $5.1 billion. And in addition to that, he took two new sources of revenue which neither exist yet, and they've been ongoing issues within the General Assembly that have been discussed for many, many years, one being adult use recreational marijuana and the other being games of skill, and took his projections from last year and doubled the revenue coming from adult use recreational, and then multiplied by 5 the game of skills revenue. And these obviously are not only two programs that don't exist, they're issues that the General Assembly has long had, if not battles over, you really haven't seen movement, and they're difficult issues. So to use that as revenue and some of it being spent in the current fiscal year, even though these things aren't up and running, really caused us concern. So, the size and the scope of the budget really took me by surprise and a lot of folks in our caucus. But it's also a starting point. And now the legislature gets to work and has to negotiate not only within our own chamber, but with the chamber across the other side of the building. And so there's a lot more to come.
Senator Hughes, what stood out to you?
First of all, the governor is introduced a budget with no new tax increases. In fact, tax reductions, essentially to respond to the economic reality and the call for Pennsylvania's people to try to figure out a way to get more money back in their pockets. The governor's budget proposal calls for a raise in the minimum wage. It's been since 2009 since there's a minimum wage increase in Pennsylvania, 2009. So the quick and dirty math, that's about 16 years. Every state around Pennsylvania has a higher minimum wage than Pennsylvania does. And so finally, come on, let's get that done. It is the economically correct thing to do for low wage workers in Pennsylvania. And in fact, it's the moral thing to do. How we ask Pennsylvania's people, and there's a significant portion of them who are being paid below the minimum wage, how we ask Pennsylvania's people to work at a salary level below the federal poverty level is really unconscionable, and morally it's incorrect. But the governor also put the priorities of Pennsylvania's people in place, in full position. An increase in education funding, an increase in housing, which I think Senator Martin would have to agree that housing is one of the most intractable issues that any legislator has to deal with, no matter what the economic situation is for that constituent coming into our office. The need for more resources in housing is hugely important to deal with workforce families, the teachers, the nurses, what have you, to deal with low-income families, to deal with folks who want to buy a home, first-time homeowners, and probably most importantly, simple upkeep of a very aging housing infrastructure. We have one of the oldest housing infrastructures in the country in Pennsylvania. Governor's proposing $50 million to help address that. And he has also proposed spending money in job growth, which we always need to make sure that we're reinvesting in our economic conditions in Pennsylvania so that we're staying up to snuff, especially in those high areas where Pennsylvania is in many respects a leader in. I mean, in the life sciences and what have you, Pennsylvania is an important leader in that space internationally, and we need to make those investments there. So I see putting more money back in people's pockets, all right? $1 billion, by the way, in property tax relief, first time in the history that Pennsylvania's ever gotten there. And I see investments in the issues that people are talking to us about on a daily basis: education, housing, public safety, job growth. Those are the investments that people are looking for, and we're responding to that.
Senator Hughes, Senator Martin a moment ago had mentioned revenues that the governor is proposing, in particular legalizing recreational marijuana, taxing and regulating skills games, and then additionally closing the Delaware loophole. Two-part question. What is the likelihood that these initiatives pass the Senate? And secondly, do you agree with the revenues that the governor is projecting?
Well, I think, look, I'm prepared to accept the numbers that he's laid out. Again, many states around Pennsylvania have adult use cannabis. The question is, and from a revenue picture, we're losing folks to those communities, and we're not getting any return on that. I think we need to be very careful about how we approach it, but I think it needs to be something that is addressed and considered. The gaming resources for skill games, which is an unregulated industry in Pennsylvania. It's the Wild Wild West with respect to how those operations run. They need to be regulated because right now people are losing money. I mean, gaming, Francine, gambling is a losing proposition. All right, no matter whether it's regulated or unregulated. What we find in the unregulated space, there's no controls on that, and how we get that under control. I think we're obligated to do that just because it just makes sense for our citizens, for our constituencies. And look, we'll work on those revenue streams. We'll find out do a better job with exacting numbers. But I think the big thing in all of this, Francine, is the madness and the chaos that's coming out of Washington, D.C. And the governor has put his budget proposal together in many respects before that chaos from Washington has been revealed and is continuing to be revealed. And we need to be thoughtful about what is coming out of Washington and the huge impact that it will have on Pennsylvania citizens. Cuts to Medicaid. And I have to say this, Francine, I got to be real clear about this. When you hear $800 billion reduction in Medicaid support from Washington, D.C., coming to the states, first of all, that's not an urban issue. That is a Pennsylvania issue. Rural hospitals get 90 to 95, maybe even higher percent of their income based on Medicaid, based on medical assistance. In all communities, when we have an older adult within our household, within our families, who winds up likely in a nursing home or something along that line, they wind up in the Medicaid program. And then you have the drug and alcohol community. There's 120,000 people in Pennsylvania who are in drug and alcohol programs, those who are suffering dramatically. Well, Medicaid pays for that. Well, we lose Medicaid, we lose the Affordable Care Act, It is hell for Pennsylvania to have to pay, Pennsylvania citizens to have to pay to deal with the losses of these important programs that make up the fabric of taking care of people no matter what their circumstance and what their situation is. And then you talk about the elimination of the programs from the U.S. From the federal government in education spaces. Pennsylvania gets about $4.5 billion in federal support annually for education supports. We lose that. We're losing teachers. We're losing folks in schools, whether it be support workers or custodial staff or counselors and what have you. And, it seems to be no stop with these folks in Washington. Pennsylvania's got to prepare for that. And so that, I think, from my perspective, is the bigger issue that we need to address. There's not a lot of controversy in Governor Shapiro's budget proposal. We can figure our way through these things if we think through them and we work through them earnestly. All right. But the chaos coming out of Washington, D.C. Is prepared to wreak havoc over every aspect of Pennsylvania's communities. And we need to be very mindful of that and how we prepare for that.
Senator Martin.
So I wanted to reemphasize something so it's important for your viewers to recognize. You recall I mentioned early on that we're spending currently $3.2 billion more than we're taking in with revenue. I also want to point out that currently we're running about $150 million behind our revenue projections, meaning what was predicted last year, we're still running behind on. So obviously there's concerns when we hear that there's going to be even more of a ramp up in revenue when the current revenue has been very volatile and it currently is running behind. The answer shouldn't be to project revenues higher and then increase spending by another $3.6 billion. That's a huge spread right there. And that's important because what our projections show us that if we would approve a budget like this and our revenues follow the same track that they're following now, 1 year from now, we would be negotiating a budget for 26-27 where we would have no money in the general fund account, no money in the rainy day fund, and we would have basically a $6 billion budget hole that have to be filled. And that's either filled by major program cuts or raising major taxes. And that's really not really smart for Pennsylvania at this very moment. And the one thing that was really noticeably absent from the governor's budget, if you recall leading up to it, there was a lot of talk about energy in Pennsylvania and the governor going after PJM, which reality was very stunning to us because PJM has been sending up the warning signs about the fact that we're losing too much baseload capacity in Pennsylvania, which is basically the stability of our grid, and that prices were going to be going up. And they are going to go up. And I warn your viewers, come June 1st, when the next time around, when we see things, you're going to potentially see some hefty energy increases, no matter what you hear coming out of Harrisburg. There was not one single thing that was booked as revenue or as an expenditure related to the governor's lightning plan that he is touting. And I bring up energy because when you talk about Pennsylvania and its challenges right now, it's no secret we've lagged a little bit economically behind other states. We are aging rapidly. Our fastest growing age demographic is 80 and above. And the number of kids graduating out of Pennsylvania high schools, our future workforce, our future tax base continues to plummet. And we literally just had 2 years ago the smallest kindergarten class enrollment statewide since 1986 that's going to be making its way through. That we need to find all kinds of ways to position Pennsylvania for growth and to be competitive. And a key sector in all of this is energy. And energy, not just for everyday homeowner when they open up their energy bills, but think about all the things energy touches. Your hospital costs, your education costs, food processors, so what you pay at the grocery store. There's not one single thing, especially for a state that's been hit as hard as it has been by inflation, that we have to get more baseload capacity on. And currently, we are sitting on an appeal by Governor Shapiro to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court on a court case that we won. And the court case basically is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, is it a tax on electricity through being a carbon tax? And currently those numbers show it being a $1.3 billion carbon tax. And he appealed it under the guise of wanting to maintain his executive authority, what, to implement a unilateral electricity tax? That's what's really maddening, is something that could really help with Pennsylvania jobs, stabilizing our grid, lowering energy costs, and lowering costs of products across the board. But there's not one single thing in this budget surrounding, with all that hoopla over the weeks right before the budget. And that was really disappointing to us. And we really hope that he withdraws this appeal, because we can get to the table and really iron out an energy plan that actually lowers costs for Pennsylvanians and makes sure that the lights come on when people hit the switch.
Senator Martin, there were various initiatives within the governor's energy plan. Are there any pieces of that that you see the Senate Republican caucus supporting?
Well, listen, there's pieces of the plan that basically create a mini Reggie, which I don't see our caucus supporting. But obviously, when you talk about the energy portfolio standards, when you talk about other things, we have said all along, even as we have passed regulation abrogation bills pretty much every session since I've been here, since Governor Wolf tried to put us in this. We just passed it at the beginning of this session year. Get rid of that the lawsuit that's appealing it, so we can get some certainty into Pennsylvania's market and get some investment here, and not see all the investment go to Ohio and West Virginia. And more importantly, with every plant closure that we're seeing workers take their skills and go across the border and move to Ohio and West Virginia. The time to do that is now. It makes no sense to maintain executive authority to raise $1 billion electricity tax. That's the role of the legislature to do that, if that's what it wished to do in terms of working with him. But get rid of that appeal, come to the table, let's negotiate and look at energy across the board, because really Pennsylvania's future at stake, and it's right under our feet in the ground, and it's something we can do safely, and that would really benefit not only us but the United States in terms of geopolitically.
Part of the governor's energy plan also included investments into hydrogen energy. There are 2 projects that were initiated under the Biden administration. Are those in jeopardy right now under the new Trump administration?
Well, I would say this. One is that there's always a lot of interference by government into the marketplace for energy, and typically it never ends well for consumers. I'll just give you a grand irony right now that's going on. There's a huge push especially within that PJM zone, to put data processing centers on our grid. You might have heard of it when they talked about 3 Mile Island being opened up. Well, that's not to power 1 million homes like it used to be. That's just for Microsoft to operate for its power it needs for data processing. So you see states that are rapidly putting this data processing as AI is growing and whatnot. But at the same time, they're allowing their baseload capacity, which is either coal, natural gas, or nuclear, to close down. Or they're taking them off the list of new plants to come online. And if we allow that to continue, we are not too far away. We've already had one incident, Christmas 2 years ago, where PJM was warning of rolling blackouts on Christmas Eve. Never thought I'd hear that in Pennsylvania, urging people to turn off their Christmas lights and turn down their heat and things like that. And I say this because, especially in this time of year in the cold, when energy doesn't work, people die. And it's a reality of where we're at. And so it sounds like the Trump administration is going to be very focused on domestic energy production, not only for what it means for everyday Americans and Pennsylvanians, but in terms of making sure, that we are not funding foreign dictators or our adversaries through purchasing energy overseas. One thing that always really bothered me, and one of the Reggie states in particular, is as they were shutting down their domestic energy, they were okay with the fact that throughout the winter, they would have tankers full of liquid natural gas from Russia sitting in Boston Harbor. Like, how does that benefit Americans and the beneficiary of purchasing gas from Russia, which Putin completely uses to exert control over Europe and other areas? How is that in the best interest of the world? And so it's just a critical issue, and I wish the governor would withdraw that appeal and come to the table, because Pennsylvania has the ability to be the leader in this area if we really do it right, do it safely, and allow that investment to occur.
Senator Hughes?
All I can say is I'm glad to hear Senator Martin talking tough on Vladimir Putin, because we sure know that Donald Trump is not talking tough on Vladimir Putin and allowing Putin to have his way in any way with pretty much about everything that is going on internationally, and especially as it relates to energy policy. Look, we've Governor Shapiro has produced and offered up a budget proposal that reduces taxes on businesses, all right, that expands property tax relief to over $1 billion. Over $1 billion. We've never had that much money in the property tax relief programs, over $1 billion, that finally, once and for all, raises the minimum wage so we can be competitive with every state around Pennsylvania, that makes legally responsible and mandated increases in education funding, because remember the Commonwealth Court decision from about 2 years ago required Pennsylvania to fix its unconstitutional education funding program, makes investments in housing to keep people in their homes and fix folks' homes that they're residing in, increases its spending in public safety, a new class of state troopers, new investments in a neighborhood-based anti-violence program, and does a substantial investment in job growth based on the region that you're located in. In southeastern Pennsylvania, in many respects, that's the life sciences. He also is putting significant dollars into getting people trained and taking on those hard-to-fill spaces. Childcare, hard to fill, getting folks in there. We have a teacher crisis. We have which is national, but is real in Pennsylvania. We've got a $40 million budget proposal to invest in a student teacher stipend, which has proven to be very successful. Healthcare workers, all of those investments, which are on the ground, real things to attract people into those spaces that are absolutely necessary, and to keep people in those jobs, which are absolutely necessary as well. Investments in our rural hospitals, investments in healthcare across the board, which are absolutely necessary, especially in the context of the chaos that's coming in Washington, D.C. We need that property tax relief because prices are going up since January 20th when President Trump was sworn into office. Prices are going up, tax and tariff conversation, gas is going up. We know what's happening with eggs. We know what's happening across the board. We need that extra help from Governor Shapiro and his budget proposal to minimize the pressures coming from Washington, D.C. and the failures, the chaos that's happening in Washington, D.C. I would remind folks, and everyone paying attention, all right, that there are thousands of Pennsylvania residents who have summarily lost their job in the last several weeks with essentially no notice, certainly no kindness or compassion, okay? But now are on the street. And for what reason? To benefit Elon Musk and his raid on the federal system, which he winds up making money off of with new federal contracts that he's securing? Come on, folks. This is not the direction we need to be going in. Governor Shapiro's budget proposal tries to put some protections and some investments on the things that are necessary and protections from what is happening in Washington, D.C.
We'll continue our discussion in just a moment, but first I'd like to give our guests a brief break and tell you about what's coming up on PCN. The topic of tomorrow's PCN Capitol Preview will be local government priorities. Ron Grutza from the PA State Association of Boroughs, Amy Sturgis from the PA Municipal League, and Shireen Hess from the County Commissioners Association of Pennsylvania will be our guests. That's tomorrow morning, live at 9 a.m. Right after that, state budget hearings continue. First, the Pennsylvania Department of State explains their funding needs to the House Appropriations Committee at 10 a.m. And then the PA Labor and Industry Department takes their turn at 1 p.m. More budget hearings from the Capitol on Wednesday as well. First, the House Appropriations Committee will hear the Agriculture Department at 1 p.m., and that's followed by the State Judiciary at 3 p.m. Governor Josh Shapiro is proposing a tax on skills games. Mike Barley from Pace-O-Matic, a company that develops software for skills games, joins us for On the Issues Wednesday at 7 p.m. Right after that, we'll look at the new report called No Hate in Our State. The executive director of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, Chad Dion Lassiter, will be our guest Wednesday night at 7:30. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN TV is now free of charge online. Go to PCNTV.com and check out our streaming service, PCN Select. PCN is Everything Pennsylvania. We're a 501c3 nonprofit television network that relies on viewers like you. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. Now let's get back to our discussion with the chairs of the Senate Appropriations Committees. Senator Scott Martin, Senator Hughes was talking a bit about instability and a lot of changes that have been taking place under the Trump administration. How do you develop a budget with such uncertainty taking place right now?
Well, first and foremost, now I will address that. I just wanted to say, too, I mean, the governor does accelerate the phase down of the corporate income tax that we negotiated with Governor Wolf before he left office. What he's also doing, he's rolling in combined reporting, and he's rolling in all the banking and financial institutions in Pennsylvania into the corporate net income tax. So though it will be lowering the overall tax rate, the expectation that the governor has is he actually has an increase in the revenue that will be coming in through that. And those will all be dollars coming out of the economy here in PA. Whenever you talk about things that are intertwined with the federal government, specifically things like Medicaid, which is the number one cost driver in our budget by far, what happens on the federal level is extremely important. And yes, I will say, as they're grappling with trying to get their hands on their budget and multi-trillion-dollar structural deficits. I mean, they've been printing money disgustingly down there, and seeing some of the things that this money has been spent on, including in other countries, is abhorrent in many ways. So as they grasp with that, there's some things that really impact PA that we're keeping our eye on. Many folks don't know that when the Biden administration came in, they actually removed the provision that allowed states flexibility to devise what their Medicaid plans would look like and the different types of coverages it would have. We can no longer apply. We can no longer put community engagement requirements on it or things like that. But the one big thing, and I point this out, is going out the door. The Biden administration approved in December what was known as an 1115 waiver to Medicaid. And that 1115 waiver will actually increase costs to the Commonwealth by about $1.6 billion and probably increase costs to the federal government anywhere from $3.5 to $4 billion. And what that waiver did was it looked at various things like providing rental costs to inmates coming out of prison for up to 6 months. It looked at providing things like at-home grocery delivery service for pregnant women. I tried to explain that one to my wife and to many of your viewers that have had children and have had to push a grocery cart and see how's that fair that their tax dollars are being used to that benefit, and such an extraordinary cost. So depending on what the Trump administration does in terms of Commonwealth ability to apply for its own plans, does it remove certain types of coverages? I know one thing right now that we're currently the administration's the state administration negotiating with these new drugs like Ozempic, where doctors in Pennsylvania, the Shapiro administration has allowed these things to be used for weight loss, and now it's come back to have a massive impact on our MCOs, and they're complaining and they're looking for a 10% increase. Well, a 10% increase in funding to the MCOs would be equivalent to another $1 billion instead of just prescribing these things for folks related to diabetes or pre-diabetes. So there's all kinds of decisions that are intertwined and a relationship between states and the federal government when it comes to a massive program like Medicaid that we have to keep our eyes on.
One item the governor did not express explicitly in his budget address was the closure of 2 state prisons and 2 community correction centers. What should Pennsylvanians know about this proposal?
Is that directed to me?
Please go ahead.
Okay. So that was in there. And basically what they're looking at is the capacity. And I think the last numbers I looked was about 85 or 86% capacity is where we're at with our state correctional institutions in terms of the bed space that we have. Obviously, their facilities are than others, and some that yet what the 2 will be, but I haven't seen any work come from that work group yet. But just so your viewers know, pretty much a closure of a state correctional institution is about $100 million of annual savings for each. So if they close 2 of them, that over 5 years would probably save taxpayers about $1 billion. Again, we're willing to work with them on these things, but we need more information. We have to know about the impact and what communities and geographically where in PA they're doing it, and we don't really know any of that quite yet.
Senator Hughes, would you like to comment at all on the closure of these facilities as well?
Well, I think we've got to process them in the proposal, and we need to see more information. What is the impact? How does it relate to safety and security inside these institutions? How does it relate to what happens if we're seeing a reduction of folks going into our institutions, and there needs to be some kind of justification of the need to keep certain institutions open. We need to see more information on this so we can make a thoughtful decision, because it has bigger implications across the board in a number of different spaces. So let's work through the details, as we have to do with all of these policy proposals and budget proposals that are going on. We need to walk through it. We need to understand it deeper. We have the capacity to manage these things. We can do that, and then let's then play itself all the way out to make the best decision for all of Pennsylvania's people. If there's a decrease in folks who are being incarcerated, then that by definition raises the question about, do we need as many facilities that are currently online? As we make those decisions, what are we doing with respect to security? What are we doing with respect to the impact that those institutions have on the overall criminal justice system? And so let's take our time. Let's be thoughtful about it. Let's make a wise decision. We can do it, and let's go forward and get it. And that's the case with all of these proposals that have been put in front of us. We have the capacity, if we keep our mind to it, to make thoughtful, careful decisions. And again, a lot of this relates to what is happening in Washington, D.C. We cannot escape. We cannot gloss over the decisions that have to be made in Pennsylvania and just say, well, that's Washington, D.C. They're going to do whatever it is they're going to do down there. No, the way the chaotic, I think in many respects unprincipled, some would say illegal way that the Trump administration is handling their business requires us to be very mindful of what's happening down there and how it relates to Pennsylvania. I mean, I'll give you an example. Governor Shapiro filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration for withholding of over $1.2 billion that had already been contracted to flow to Pennsylvania for important services, all right? Like housing, like education, and spaces like that. We had to file a lawsuit with money that was already on the books by law appropriated to come to Pennsylvania to deal with important Pennsylvania programs to respond to the needs of Pennsylvania's people. Hopefully we don't have to go through this ongoing process of any time money is supposed to be coming to Pennsylvania from the federal government, that we've got to sue to make sure it gets there. That's not the way we're supposed to operate. and it only provides chaos at the local community. And I think what you're seeing, Francine, is a lot of people at the local level are paying closer attention to what's going on, and they're not excited about what's happening. They are excited in an opposition way about what's going on in Washington. They are not embracing what they're seeing out of Washington, D.C. It's chaotic, and it doesn't respond to the needs of the people in Pennsylvania.
I'd like to shift our focus, if I may. I know you touched briefly upon the governor's proposals for education. In particular, he's proposing an additional $526 million in adequacy payment for schools that are having funding challenges. I want to hone in on one particular initiative. The governor's proposing a base tuition rate for cyber charter schools of roughly, I believe, $8,000. Can you talk a little bit about this proposal and both of your feelings on whether or not you're willing to support this?
Well, the cyber charter folks and educators, they get paid per student as if they were in a bricks and mortar school, all right? So they don't have the bricks and mortar responsibilities, all right? They don't have, a teacher, a building, a heating cost to keep the building open, to keep the building heated, the other responsibilities, but they get paid that rate, maybe $26,000, $27,000 per student, and they don't have the same cost. So it's kind of like mind-boggling why we would continue to do that, because it winds up being extra cash in their pockets. And even the Republican Auditor General has reviewed the situation and said there's this huge gap in terms of the actual cost per student that's being provided by cyber charter schools and what it is that they're receiving. Not the Democratic Auditor General, although the Democratic Auditor General found the same thing out years ago. Republican Auditor General has discovered this as well. It makes no sense. So what the Shapiro administration has said, look, it's the cost to adequately and appropriately educate someone in a cyber charter, which is where they go to their computer at home, to their computer, look on their computer and get the instruction there, all right, is around about $8,000 per, not $20,000 or $25,000 or $30,000 per. So we need to bring that cost down and let those dollars move into the education system of everyone who's going to a bricks and mortar school. And I have to say, the performance of cyber charters is below, these are the numbers, the performance of cyber charters are below what bricks and mortar schools are providing. It's below, all right? So they're getting an accelerated payment, an inflated payment to perform at a deflated level. They're performing less than what is happening in bricks and mortar schools. Not sure why we continue to fund it at that level. There's been a number of years that we've tried to fix this. We've not been able to get it done. So hopefully we can get it done this cycle.
Senator Martin.
So actually, I had a co-sponsorship memo out about this last fall, and I'm actually a believer in having a standardized rate across the state. A lot of your viewers may not know is that right now there's 500 different formulas to figuring this out. You can literally have the same classroom in a cyber charter school where a school's paying $7,000 and another school is paying $21,000 for basic education. For me, I believe it's probably more pertinent that the state is actually implementing this program, negotiating what the rates will be on an annual basis and have justification for it. Years ago, and I take a little exception with the governor saying 8,000. His predecessor, probably midway through his 8 years as governor, Tom Wolf, he pegged it at 8,000, and then 2 years later, his own Department of Education signed off on it being 14,000 once they did the actual audit and study of what it should be. The bottom line is you want it to be a fair rate. You also want accountability in the system. And boy, oh boy, it absolutely should be standardized across the entire Commonwealth and not seeing this wide variety. I also like the fact, and Senator Hughes knows this, well, is this is a very contentious issue on the local level with school districts that also are having to put forward costs to pay for this. And my belief is that you remove a lot of that consternation politically on the lower end, and let's focus more on the education of children. And yes, there's going to be families out there who, if they believe their child and what's best for their individual need to move them to another place, or maybe because they were assaulted in their prior school, whatever the issue might be, that they're able to do that. But I will say this to you, Francine. We are coming upon the point, you heard me talk about earlier about the number of kids we're educating going down tremendously, and the projection is that we're going to lose another 17% more. Now, that's an average. We have school districts in Pennsylvania, some of which are receiving the most amount of money in different areas around the Commonwealth, that are seeing anywhere between a 13 to 20% drop in enrollment. But yet the money keeps going up. And what's even more troubling to me, and what we need to get to as the General Assembly, just this past week, we had the National Assessment for School Progress Report Card come out again. And when I look at some of these stats, we're actually going backwards. Only 41% of fourth graders can do fourth grade math. Only 33% can read at grade level. And going from bad to worst, at eighth grade, as they're in school longer, the average is only 31% can perform at a grade level for math or reading. Like, there has to be outcomes that are met. And so the issue is we deal with a shrinking school enrollment demographic. What is the value of each child out there? And right now, I can tell you the way the money's distributed is you're telling a kid that lives in one part of the state that they're only worth X number of dollars for basic education, and another part of the state, they're worth 3 times as much in some cases. That, to me, is not equity in any fashion. So there needs to be accountability. Parents need to be able to be empowered to meet their child's individual needs, whatever they might be, and be able to go to school in a safe environment. So given the fact that education is one of the largest parts of our budget, I know there's going to be a lot of focus on it yet again, but those are the challenges that we're faced with as we head towards this. As you keep hearing, we need more money. Outcomes are going down and enrollment's going down. At some point, you have to look your taxpayers in the face and say, what are we getting wrong here? What are we investing in, and what's the return on that? And that's critically important.
If I could, Francine, just to build on Senator Martin's last statement, the crisis with grade level reading and grade level math is a national crisis, and is a crisis, unfortunately, that we see happening, and it's been happening too long. It is now a crisis that is happening in every economic sector, in every community across the country. All right. The national testing effort that Senator Martin just talked about shows that it's happening in wealthy school districts. It's happening in middle income school districts. It's happening in low wealth school districts. It's happening across all races. It's happening across all genders. It is a national crisis that we need to address with intentionality. Targeted, certified reading teachers, math specialists, going into classrooms with an extra level of intentionality to fix this best at early ages, but we cannot abandon our high school students, all right, who have suffered from a lack of appropriate support from early ages. Now they're in high school, and if we don't get it fixed right in high school, then the whole opportunity for them to have a significant and productive and thriving work life, work experience, is jeopardized. But the fact that it's happening across the board, the fact that it's happening in every community, the fact that it's happening in rural, suburban, and urban communities, all races, all genders, all classes, tells us that there's a very big problem. I dare say, Francine, it's probably related to this thing right here. Okay? Let me make sure it's not buzzing. It's probably related to this thing right here. and far too much time being spent on devices as opposed to receiving intentional instruction to fix a problem that doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. I do a lot of work in grade level reading. The whole summer slide issue that we've been experiencing for many years can be remedied just by providing instruction, quality instruction during that summer period. All right. So that when a child leaves in June, finishes school in June, and if they have some academic activity during the course of the summer, that they're at the same level that they were when they start back in September. We have a lot of students who are finishing up in June. They have no academic activity during the summer, and they wind up 2 to 3 months behind when they start back in school in September. That is a simple thing that can be addressed in a simple way, just providing academic support during the course of those summer months. We've worked that, we've addressed that, and it's had proven success. Now we have to take it across the Commonwealth and, in fact, across the country.
I'm going to jump in here. We are getting short on time. Senator Martin, I'm going to give you the last word. There are 2 more weeks of budget hearings to take place. What happens next in the budget process?
Well, real quick, Francine, I'll just say I agree with Senator Hughes. The United States does have a problem in hitting educational standards. We are down, but Pennsylvania is well below even what the national average is. And I don't want to paint every single school district out there with the same brush, because averages mean that there's people lower and there's people higher, and that's what it is. But we have our work cut out on this. We started off this week coming up with the Department of Environmental Protection, so I'm sure the energy topics and permitting are going to be a pretty big focus as we move forward. And of course, this is only week 2 of 3 weeks. Every agency is going to have critical questions asked of it. And the very final day, which is on March the 6th, we will have the budget secretary, Ori Munson, that comes in. That's kind of like the Super Bowl of appropriations hearings. And, all the information that's been gathered, it usually culminates in a lot of the questions there. So we're looking forward to hearing what's going on with more of our agencies, and we'll have quite a bit more between now and March 6th.
I'd like to remind our viewers that if you missed any of the budget hearings, you can also watch them both live streaming online and on our website and PCN Select. I'd like to thank our guests today, Senator Scott Martin, Senator Vincent Hughes. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Earlier, PCN spoke with Representative Gina Curry about her legislation on insurance protections for overdose reversal drugs.
Welcome to our program. You've recently proposed a law involving a drug known as naloxone. What is naloxone?
Hi. My understanding of naloxone is it's a drug that is also known as Narcan. And it helps to help folks who have had overdose poisoning to help them revive.
What would your law on this aim to do?
So Lloyd's Law, if I can give you just a little bit of a background about how this began. This is actually a legacy law in my district. I took over in this district back in 2021. And the legislator who was previously in the seat had worked with one of our constituents, who actually is a friend of both of ours, around this really tragic situation that she had endured. Her son, Lloyd, unfortunately succumbed to overdose poisoning. And in his young life, was taken by this awful situation. And so her name is Sharon White. I call it a legacy piece of legislation because it's been going on. And when I took the seat, the previous legislator asked me if I could keep this legislation going. And so very proud to do so. I know Sharon White, whose son and whose family endured quite a bit. And now he's no longer with us. And this is definitely legacy, because if we can help folks who have tried to help their family members or friends by having a prescription on their prescription profile. A lot of people don't know. We have prescription profiles that can actually be a hindrance to receiving benefits, or in this case, life insurance. Ms. White went on to try to secure additional life insurance, and in doing so, they looked at her prescription profile and she was denied. She was denied because she had naloxone as a part of her prescription profile. And that's where this legislation began. She simply was trying to help her child. If there was an incident, this was before Narcan/naloxone was very available, right? Now you can get naloxone in legislators' offices, municipal buildings, lots of places that people hold it in case of an emergency. Back when this was going on, she had to have a prescription. And so that prescription became a part of her prescription profile. And so we want to make sure that folks across the Commonwealth who have this on their prescription profile are not denied the ability to get more life insurance for themselves or in any other way. This specifically zones in on life insurance in the prescription profile, but with naloxone. But you can think about so many other areas where folks' prescription profiles have resulted in denials.
Have you spoken with any medical workers or insurance people or anyone who works with those suffering from addictions about this bill, and what have they said?
Well, I think just thinking about the House, this bill has gone through the House successfully. Before I came, Representative Sanchez had taken up the bill. And then last year, I co-primed with him. He was the lead on it. And he was the lead on it because actually Miss White's daughter lives in Montgomery County. So he felt very compelled to help this family as well. And Miss White, then this year, we talked about reintroducing it. Last year, it went through committee, the insurance committee, unanimously. But it didn't make it up through the Senate. I don't even know if it was introduced at the Senate level because so many bills were passed in the House. But we said we're going to reintroduce it again because, and I think that was the first session week that we were here, actually, at the end of January. It went unanimous in the insurance committee again, a very bipartisan vote. And so we know that this is a great piece of legislation. The insurance industry agrees with it. There's not a lot of folks that are in opposition. And I think in looking at, the lives of those who, we all have families, we know what this is. If this comes into our lives, we want to be able to help our family members or our friends. And so this is something that feels like a punishment for somebody who was trying to help.
Representative Gina Curry, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
That concludes today's show. We'll be back tomorrow morning to discuss local government issues. Our guests will be Ron Grutza from the PA State Association of Boroughs, Amy Sturgis from the Pennsylvania Municipal League, and Shireen Hess from the County Commissioners Association of Pennsylvania. That's tomorrow live at 9 a.m. I'm Francine Schertzer. Thank you for watching.